Back in 2016, a small little first-person adventure hit the indie market, hailing all the way from Italy. The Town of Light was a narrative psychological thriller set in the abandoned ruins of the Volterra psychiatric asylum in Tuscany. A real place where real patients were treated, and the protagonist also felt right at home. Exploring the facilities, its secrets and your own mind was interesting, engaging and sometimes even a bit spooky. A great mixture for the first release of a tiny European studio. Only one question remains: would they manage to pull off the same thing again?
Nanny, will you tell me the story of the White Lady?
No, little sparrow. Not tonight. A fog is coming, see?
Yes, I know that when it's foggy, the lady kills young women. But why is she so evil?
You see, Giulia, pain and suffering can make us do evil things, even if we're not actually bad.
Martha is Dead tells the story of two young girls, Martha and Giulia. By looking through the eyes of the latter, the player will try to resolve the mystery about their sister's oh-so-tragical death. From the very first moment on, things are quite unclear, since Giulia's memory is blurry. To help herself out, she is taking pictures of certain things of relevance that she discovers, and it's up to us to develop them in the dark chamber. One after the other, every single one in a repeated task. Additionally, we roam the area around the villa, including a little chapel, a dense forest, a picturesque lake, and later on we even briefly visit a nearby church. Whereas most of the areas are open for us to explore, doing so will not result in anything useful. Apart from graphical offerings, there's neither a lot to see nor to do. Giulia won't discover any additional information by herself, nor can we collect any interesting intel that will grant us some deeper lore or even achievements. For the most part, the areas we roam are just a plain narrative, albeit a lovely one, but a little more on that one later. The game plays out in individual days, and each time we wake up in our bed, get dressed, grab our things and head out the door before we take a look at the daily newspaper lying on the dinner table. The headlines are sometimes linked to our own story and the happenings surrounding it, but for the most part they set the overall tone for the game. In the midst of Tuscany, we don't get to feel it that much, but the year is 1944 and we are still in the middle of World War II. Having a German officer as a father makes things a little easier when you're on that side that currently has the upper hand, but radio broadcasts, newspaper articles and little notes here and there quickly reveal that our beloved father is a target for an assassination attempt to turn the tides in war-torn Italy. We as a player will be faced with the option to either help the insurgents or tell our father and the German Supreme Command about it. Being one of very few free options in the game, this will only give us a couple of more tasks to do in pursuing this side quest, but that's all there is to it. It will neither add to the overall story nor alter its narration in any way. And this brings us to the biggest problem with this game. There simply is not enough flesh on the bone. We are bound to do the same tasks over and over again throughout the game. Go to room A to find subject B, which will lead us to point C. We take a picture, turn it into a photograph in the dark room, which will reveal more information that will be eventually leading us to the next X on the map, where we will pursue another task. And that's about it. Whereas it would be wrong to hope for diverse gameplay mechanics in a so-called walking simulator, this quickly becomes very tedious and even boring, because it's not backed up by an interesting story. Why do we only briefly hear about the war? Why is it hardly ever shown? A few radio broadcasts and some playings flying over our heads only set the tone for something much bigger that's being completely left out here. Also, we chase down a spiritual entity and try our luck in tarot cards, But none of this adds some relevance to the overall picture. The developers clearly want you as a player to put all the pieces of this puzzle together on your own. And there is a fine line between providing enough information to actually form a bigger picture, or just having a few hints here and there, none of them clearly linked, and once the credits roll, too many loose threads remain unconnected and questions unanswered.
No one lies to the face of their own death, so I asked how their choice was reached. They had trusted in fate. Oh, how naive they were. One thing is for sure. I'll put things back where they belong. I will correct my ignorance and give fate back its blindfold.
Within the last hour of the game, we will encounter a puppet theater, where Giulia will serve as a narrator, while our controls are limited to moving the dolls from left to right and choosing between certain interactions. Again, none of these choices bring anything relevant to the table or alter the ending in one way or another. Instead, this is probably the most boring piece of gameplay I have ever witnessed within this subgenre. This could have easily been a video sequence that just plays on its own, but instead we are bound to the controller while the minutes just keep on dragging. It is tedious, unengaging, and backed up by a 30-second musical loop that will drill itself so deep into your brain that you actually want to hurt yourself. Graphically, Martha is Dead can stand on its own and looks between decent and quite good at times. Animations are alright, lighting effects can be pretty, whereas textures range from bad to fairly alright. Built with the Unreal Engine 4, there's nothing we haven't seen so far yet, but the developers at LKA Games clearly have given their best shot. Unfortunately, one of the bigger problems lies with the game's performance. Playing on a Ryzen 5 2600 with a Vega 56 and 16 gigs of RAM, I had to tone a few settings down to reach a stable 60 to 70 FPS, but even then there were some drops even down to the mid-30s. And if that wouldn't be enough yet, in the later chapters the game began to stutter horribly, with the camera being thrown back and forth without me doing any sudden movements at all. Granted, my rig is not new anymore, but the Unreal Engine 4 is over 7 years old by now and has been running on my machine in several games absolutely flawlessly. So this is not an issue of low power, but simply a poorly optimized game. And even if you're a small indie team, this is not how you ship a game, even if all the big ones tend to do the same by now. Sound-wise, there is not much to say, apart from the horrible 30-second loop track I've mentioned before. The rest of the soundtrack is alright, voice acting is decent, albeit not amazing, and the ambient effects are proper. So overall it's okay, I guess. In the end, Martha is Dead tries to take on the psychological legacy that was introduced and set up by its predecessor, The Town of Light. But almost everything that title did right, this one does wrong. The explorable area is bigger, but doesn't offer enough. The narration is unengaging and won't pull you in as much, some characters' decisions simply don't make much sense, and there's too much left unsaid, unexplored, or underdeveloped. It almost feels like the developers had a vision in mind, but didn't stick to it all the way. Here and there are some really atmospheric and interesting elements, but only an hour later it seems like they have been completely deserted for something else. It doesn't feel coherent and leaves you behind with too many questions. On top of that, I've encountered an absolute plot stopper of a bug towards the end that forced me to restart a whole chapter. And in a narrative game where you cannot skip anything, that's the final nail in the coffin. If you are interested in playing a tense first-person thriller, check out The Town of Light instead, which is the much better game overall, even if it edged like a jar of milk. or go with the much more tense Layers of Fear, or the very atmospheric The Suicidal Rachel Foster. And if you still want to roam around Tuscany with Giulia, wait. Just wait until the price has dropped to around 10 euros and patches have fixed the game's biggest flaws. Until then, thank you very much for watching. I see you guys in the next one.